question. What is a sign?
So when we talk about logical reasons, let's say a logical reasoning, that can be called a correct sign. But generally the word sign or mark refers to the last element of that. Say, for instance, in the proposition, in the syllogism, sound is impermanent because it's a product. There's three elements. Sound is the subject that's being investigated. Sound is impermanent. Impermanent is said to be the predicate. The two together, sound is impermanent, is the thesis you're trying to prove. And the sign is because it's a product, because it is a product. That is the sign, or product is the sign. So although you can call the whole logical statement a correct sign, the word sign or mark is used to refer to the last element there. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. Product is the sign in the proof of sound is impermanent. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're going to begin our weekly class with a little motivation and meditation. So sitting comfortably, relaxing your body, relaxing your mind in the sense of remembering there's nothing else you have to do right now, hopefully. Place your attention, first of all, on your respiration, and then keep that in mind. Be mindful of your respiration to the exclusion of everything else. Not controlling it, just observing it. As always, recognize if you're multitasking, so to speak, if your mind is trying to address some other thought, let go of that. You can try to employ what is called squeezing attention, which doesn't mean your body sort of squinches up, but your mind kind of tightens on its object of observation, in this case, the respiration. Slowly withdrawing your attention away from your senses, your eyes, ears, nose, taste, consciousnesses. Still, there'll be some apprehension of the body consciousness because that's what's recognizing the respiration. It's said that if you were to take the respiration as your main meditative object, that in the end of many hours or days of observation, you would begin to develop a mental image of the air element. Having quieted the mind a little with that preliminary, now bring your attention to your mental consciousness. The spaciousness of your mind, the clear light nature of your mind, within which thoughts are arising, emotion, emotional states, memories of the past, plans of the future, observations about the present. Random thoughts and images that arise due to karma and juxtaposition with other thoughts that you had just had. Leaving them aside, just look at the spaciousness of the mind within which they're arising, its lack of obstructing contact, its lack of obstruction, let's say, to the arisal and dissolution of the thoughts back into the consciousness. Now, like drawing in the fifth limb, now you can withdraw your attention to the body consciousness. That's just an appearance to your mind, to your mental consciousness. What we're aiming for is a non-conceptualizing state, still conceptual in that you're building a mental image of the mental consciousness, the clear light nature, but non-conceptualizing in the sense that other thoughts are becoming less frequent and less intense and hopefully disappearing. Within this clear light nature of our mind, we could develop any positive equality. We can eliminate eventually from the root, but certainly through not attending to them at the beginning, we can eliminate all the discordant states of mind, delusions, distractions. All this is due to our having obtained this life, a life of leisure and endowment, a life as a human in a religious country where the Dharma still exists. The Buddha taught the Holy Dharma. We have benefactors, community to support us. We have sound senses. Everything that we need to practice the Dharma as a result of having created the karma in previous lifetimes, depending on the kindness of other sentient beings. We're able to practice morality and generosity, two of the main causes of creating the karmic causes of a human rebirth, a life of leisure and endowment. Taking them to mind the suffering of other sentient beings, their fundamental cause of their suffering is their ignorance of inherent existence. They're grasping to a self-identity, gives rise to all of their anger and attachment and jealousy, pride, their low self-esteem, confusion, paranoia. Having ourselves investigated and having maybe developed a certain belief that the self does not exist the way that it appears to the mind, out of a compassion for sentient beings who've been kind to us in the past, in the present, and will be kind to us in the future, who are exactly equal with us in wanting to be free of suffering and to have happiness. Thinking I'm going to participate this morning in order to understand better the nature of our mind, the laboratory of our mind, within which we can do these great experiments to develop compassion and renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom, with the aim of eventually becoming enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings, leading them effortlessly, spontaneously, and perfectly out of suffering into full enlightenment. It's for that reason I'm going to participate this morning in the Lotus class. Paying attention, listening, contemplating. When some insight arises, holding that in mind, meditating on that. And as a result of that motivation, we're going to recite the prayer, praise, and request to Manjushri, Buddha of Wisdom. So there's a praise and request. Homage to my guru and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of seeing all as it is, which is in the scripture being the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, whose pure genius shines like the sun unclouded by the two obscurations, and who with compassion, like a father, like a parent for their only child, teaches with 60-fold eloquence, all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, who are groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering. You, Manjushri, whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions, the darkness of our afflictions, and frees us from the iron chains of karma. You who wield wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance that hews down every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, who have finished the 10 grounds, who are the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments, the 32 major marks and the 80 minor signs. O Manjushri, to you I bow. Please dispel the darkness of my mind. With that request, we recite the Om Arapatsanadi mantra 21 times, and then follow with, on one breath, the recitation of the seed syllable D, the final syllable, D-H-I-D, that we imagine on the tip of our tongue. We recite that 108 times on one breath after reciting the Om Arapatsanadi 21 times. And as we swallow saliva, imagine that D comes down and blesses our mental consciousness at our heart chakra. Om Arapatsanadi, 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 Om Arapatsanadi. What was that? Imagine the blessings of the quick wisdom of Manjushri embodied by that single syllable D absorbs into your mind. And final verse, with the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of my mind's confusion. Grant me the light of self-assured intelligence, that I may see into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Okay, thank you. So here we are again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ida and Rowena, David, Manuel, someone without any name, and Ida, and then someone whose name is very complicated there. Good to see you. Before we begin, any lingering questions from previous class? Hi, David. Oh, that's that's Karen.
Yes.
Name.
My name is my superpower.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So anyone have oh, Amanda has a question.
Yes.
Go for it. Are you stuck? We don't hear anything. We'll let her Wi-Fi get connected up again. Sounds like we lost connection with her there. Anyone else have a question while we're waiting? Okay, we'll wait. I'll begin, but I'll apportion some time for Amanda when she gets her Wi-Fi up and running again. I think she's disconnected and is going to try it again. Okay, Stephen, do you have a question, or you're working your monitor there? Okay. Yarpel, you okay? Questions? No? Okay. So we have gotten to the point in the text on page 20 in the terminological divisions of valid cognizers. So terminological is one of the other ways that's translated as etymological divisions. What it means is they're not actual divisions of valid cognizers. Not all of them are valid cognizers, but they seem like valid cognizers. So, and this is another terminological division of valid cognizers. So, inference for oneself and inference for others, or an other. So what does that mean? Inference for oneself, it actually refers to inferential cognizers. So remember what are inferential cognizers? Inferential cognizers are mental consciousnesses, not any of the sense consciousness. It's mental consciousness, which is conceptual, which is realizing something based on a correct reasoning. Like we said before, sound is impermanent because it's a product, like a pot, for instance. You can give an example at the end, like a pot. That is a correct sign. That correct sign is not the inference. The inference here is the inferential cognizer that having recognized, having already established that sound is a product. Remember, sound is impermanent because it's a product. Realize that sound is a product and that all products are necessarily impermanent. One who's recognized that and is played with that in one's mind, in one's conceptual mind, one's concentrating, and has led to the conclusion then that, oh, sound is impermanent because it's a product. At that moment, one has an inferential cognizer. That's called here inference for oneself. That's actual consciousness, right? So we talked about that before, but here it's stated that way. So what is an inference for another? Well, an inference for another is actually a statement that you might make to bring about an inferential cognizer in another, but in a roundabout way, not just stating the syllogism, sound is impermanent because it's a product, because the person that you're trying to influence, say for instance, in debate, you might use what's called a proof statement. Here it's in the following lines, it says, the first, inference for oneself and inferential cognizer are synonymous. They're the same thing, right? Whereas the second division, inference for another, is a correct proof statement. They are synonymous. So a correct proof statement is not a consciousness. A correct proof statement is speech. It's what you might state like in debate to someone else to help them understand. It wouldn't just be the speech, sound is impermanent because it's a product. You might say that all products are impermanent and sound is a product. That would be a proof statement to someone who has maybe some doubt. They haven't, they're not ready to have the inferential cognizer yet. You're trying to eliminate some doubts in their mind. In fact, there's even something that comes before that if you're trying to help someone understand, you might throw a consequence to them of their wrong idea. They, say, for instance, they may know that products are impermanent, and they might know that sound is a product, but they still, for some reason, they still have the doubt that sound is impermanent. Did you follow that? They know that products are impermanent. Products means things that come about because causes and conditions. Okay, yeah, I can get that. Maybe they know that sound is a product because you could show them a bell, or it is a product of causes and conditions. You hit the clangor of the bell, or you hit the bell with the stick, and the bell resonates. So they say, oh yeah, sound is a product, but they still have a doubt in their mind that sound is impermanent. Does that make sense to you? Can you imagine that? Nadine, what do you think? Yeah. So you might throw some absurd consequence at them that will cause them to develop doubt, and then you would give a correct proof statement to them. All products are impermanent. Sound is a product. So that is not. So here, what it says. What do we say here? Inference for another is not an actual consciousness, so it's not a valid cognizer. It's speech. Okay, it's meant to bring about an inferential cognizer in the mind of another. Okay, so far? Makes sense? Anyone have doubt? Jonathan, you're thinking, okay, that's good. So ancillarily, you know what ancillarily means? Yarpel, do you know what ancillarily means? Yeah, by the way, kind of like, accompanying, yeah, sort of like that sharla in Tibetan. Shar means like on the side. So ancillarily, that means in connection to this topic, we're going to talk about a mind apprehending a sign. Takzin gisem, I guess. Tak means sign or mark. Remember when we talk about a syllogism, sound is impermanent because it's a product. But here, a sign, mind's apprehending a sign, there are two parts, definitions and divisions. So the definition of something being a mind apprehending a sign has to be put in context. It has to be said in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sound product, because you can't just say a sign, a mind apprehending a sign in general. You have to give it in a particular example. So in the example, sound is impermanent by the sign product. We're talking about here inference for oneself. That is, one's trying to develop an inferential cognizer. One's mulling this over. So what in order to realize that, you have to have had either with direct perception or an inference, a correct inference, realization that sound is a product. Remember, sound is impermanent because it's a product. So you have to have realized what is called the property of the subject being sound, that it is a property of the sign, that it has the sign. Sound is a product. Now, like I gave the example before, you might actually perceive that with your eye if a bell was clanged and you saw that it's a product, physically see, or you can infer that, but you have to, that's called a mind apprehending a sign. It's sometimes called an establishing condition in some of the translations. So what it means is, in order to realize a syllogism, you have to realize the individual elements unambiguously. Otherwise, the whole thing's not going to gel in your mind, right? You're not going to be able to prove that sound is impermanent by the sign product. You have to realize that sound is a product. You also have to realize that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent, or that the sign pervades the predicate. There's a necessity that if something is a product, it is necessarily impermanent. What about those two terms, sound and product? How are they related? Does anyone know? Sound and product. Doris.
Isn't sign just the reason for the syllogism, or?
Sound is a product. A sound is impermanent because it's a product. That's a syllogism. So I'm asking about the predicate and the sign, product and impermanent.
All products are impermanent.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of the interesting things is if you recall from our study of tenets, product and impermanent are synonyms. They're synonyms. What if I said sound is impermanent because it's impermanent? Or, that's circular logic or reasoning or something. It doesn't prove anything. But if I say sound is impermanent because it's a product, that works, even though product is a synonym of impermanent. How can that be? How could that be a correct sign if it's a synonym of impermanent? Do you get the gist of what I'm asking here, the qualm? If two things are synonyms, I was going to say synonym, I can't even say it now, synonym. What's the thing you put on your toast? I can't pronounce it now. Cinnamon. Yeah. If two things are synonyms, still, although they're synonyms, one recognizes them in different ways. The import of your mind of product, something being a product, is different than, to your mind, is different than if you say impermanence. They are synonymous. You can't be one without the other. That's not always the case in signs. This is not always the sign is a synonym of the predicate, but in this particular case it is. But that's useful to know that in the case of certain things are more recognizable when you use one word or another. So you have to realize, established in your mind, or apprehended the sign that sound is a product, and you have to also have established in your mind through reasoning generally. It's difficult to establish this pervasion by direct perception that whatever is impermanent is necessarily a product. Once you've established those and you let that settle in your mind from some time, you may be able to develop the inferential cognizer. But these two things that come before are called minds apprehending a sign, or in Yeshe Raptin's book, which I like the sort of more general sort of flavor of their translation. It's not a literal translation, but it's establishing cognitions. So you have to first establish that sound is a product, and you have to establish that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Now, when we talked about correct signs briefly before, a couple of contexts, we said there are three modes or three things that have to take place for a correct sign. There has to be the property of the subject. This is what we're talking about. The sound is a product. There has to be the forward pervasion, which means that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. It's maybe called the forward pervasion because it's stated in the same terms that are there. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. Whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. And there has to be the reverse pervasion. Who knows what the reverse pervasion would be in that statement, in that syllogism? Stephen, do you know?
No, I don't, Venerable George.
Yarpil knows.
A non-product is non-permanent.
Not exactly. Actually, not quite. Here, instead of saying instead of the sign pervades the predicate, you say that the non-predicate pervades the non-sign. There's two reverses here. So whatever is not impermanent is necessarily not a product.
Not a product. Okay.
Whatever is not impermanent, because the predicate is impermanent, whatever is not impermanent is necessarily not a product. Is that right? If it's not impermanent, what does that mean? It has to be permanent, right? If it's not impermanent, it has to be permanent. So whatever is not impermanent it's necessary that it is not a product. Yeah. So in general, it's shown in the texts on logic that if you can establish the forward pervasion, that's sufficient. You don't have to establish the reverse pervasion. It will necessarily follow if the forward pervasion is present. So generally, we can deal with just those two: the property of the subject, sound is a product, and the fact that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. So those both of those recognitions are called minds apprehending a sign. So here it gives the definition of something being a mind apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product is: it is a knower in the continuum of a full-fledged other party. We have to define what that means. It means for someone who is full-fledged means they're susceptible to this realization. They don't have contradictory apprehensions. They are ready to make this realization. Let's say, it is a knower in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom sound is being proved to be impermanent by the sign product. That in addition, there is a common locus. You know what common locus means? Amanda, you know what common locus means?
Is it a common point or a common argument or a common focus or something like that?
So what would be a common locus? Say, for instance, is there a common locus between male and female?
Human?
Maybe nowadays, politically correct, I can't say that. But let's say if we just say that there are two genders, there are
human?
other genders, mistaken genders, double genders. But to say if there's just two genders, is there a common locus between being a man and a woman?
Being a human?
Human being.
No, is there something which is both being both male and female at the same time? Generally, no. Okay.
No.
Is there a common locus between being impermanent and permanent?
No.
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 Is there a common locus between being human and being a woman?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The women are both human and women. Females are both so that there's a common locus. So that's the sense of common locus, something which is fits both categories. So it has to fit both of these categories. It has to be incontrovertible with respect to either that sound is a product or that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Remember, those are the two establishing conditions. So it says either of those. It has to be incontrovertible. That means it has to have realized that, right? That sound is a product, or that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent, because there's two kinds of establishing conditions, or two kinds of signs, minds apprehending a sign. The other thing that it has to be a common locus of these, being the cause of an inferential cognizer realizing that sound is impermanent by the sign product and arises in dependence upon its acting as a causal condition. So what does that mean? It can't be, to be called a mind apprehending a sign, it can't just be, just having realized that sound is impermanent. A sound is a product. That particular realization, that incontrovertible understanding, has to be the cause of the inferential cognizer. It has to be in close juxtaposition. Just generally understanding that sound is a product is not necessarily called a sign, a mind apprehending a sign. It's only when it's just at that juxtaposition of becoming an inferential cognizer. Just at those final moment of that sequence. Does that make sense, Bob? Yeah, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question about the or, and I have a suspicion that it's tied up in the fact that this isn't the actual inferential proof, and that's why you have the or. But it struck me as really a little bit odd, because if you were going to have the actual inferential proof, you would have to change that or to an and. But I'm suspicious that this is just a cause, but it isn't the actual inferential proof.
It's not the actual inferential cognizer, right? It is a cause of the inferential cognizer. You have to have these understandings in your mind. So as both of them, both the property of the subject, that sound is a product, if correctly realized in your mind at the time of just being ready to realize the proof, that is called a mind apprehending a sign. Also, that products are necessarily impermanent, that is the forward privation. If you've realized that, that is also called a mind apprehending a sign. Both of them have to be present for that inferential cognizer to gel, to be generated. Okay, so you have to think about this a bit. Divisions. When minds apprehending a sign are divided, when establishing conditions are divided, there's another way of translating, right? There are minds apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sound product that comprehend that sound is a product. What is that? That's the property of the subject, remember? And there's a second division, minds apprehending a sign in the proof of sound is impermanent by the sign product that comprehend, realize whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Now this might sound redundant. We've sort of gone over this already. So that's why Bob was asking about the word or. They're two different divisions of minds apprehending a sign. Both of them are called minds apprehending a sign. Christine, are you completely flummoxed?
Well, I understand it when you say it, but when this call is over, that will be completely gone.
Oh, no, okay. So
But
that's
getting
why
it
you
now
have
is enough. I'm getting it.
That's, yeah, but that's what you, so that's why you have to send the discussion group afterwards, and you have to read it again later
I do.
and think about it. And
I
then
do.
next class say, I thought about it, but now I still have this down. So it's a cumulative process.
Right.
And the article that Bob so kindly forwarded to you, that I mentioned, I think, who were we talking with? Yeah, Doris beforehand, by George Dreyfus. I think was it the one on ontology, or was that the, so that is talking about a lot of these kind of things, and it's talking about something we're just going to mention next in the class in a couple, a few minutes. That kind of article I wanted you to read, because if you start to read that, you could almost say, oh my gosh, I would not have had any idea what this was saying if we hadn't gone through all these details and forced my mind to think of all these things, heard these terms and the definitions, and tried to, I might have mentioned during the Drupta class, during the tenets class earlier this year, another class, that when I taught the Heart Sutra as part of the basic program in California, and then just afterwards, the Dalai Lama taught the Heart Sutra at some big stadium. I can't remember where it was. It was sort of in the Santa Cruz area. And all of the students went, of course. And they came back, and almost all of them said the same thing. It meant so much more having understood the terms. We could follow what was being said. Otherwise, it would have been, in one ear and out the other. There might have been some pleasant feeling that you listened to the Dalai Lama, but, so that article by George Dreyfus, after this class today, if you've got a little time, you're having your afternoon tea, read that, and just see how far you can get into that, having heard and understood these terms and so forth. It'll mainly about the subject that's coming next after what we're talking about now. So divisions, there are two divisions of minds: apprehending a sign or establishing conditions, that which establishes the property of the subject, that whatever is that sound is necessarily a product, and the forward provision, whatever is a product is necessarily a sign. Those are two divisions. So I won't go over the second definition. It's just sort of saying the same thing again. The definition of something being a mind apprehending a sign, and the proof of sound is impermanent by the sign product that comprehends whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. So it's just that realizes the forward provision. Then when the first, that is mind's apprehending a sign and the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product that comprehends sound as a product, for that's the property of the subject. When they are divided, there are three ways that you can have that establishing cognition, that mind apprehending a sign. There are direct perceivers that are minds apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product that comprehends sound as a product. So I'll go directly to the example of that. From among these, an illustration of the first, a direct perceiver that realizes that is a direct perceiver comprehending that sound is a product in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom it is being proved that sound is impermanent by the sound product. What does that mean? It means you see with your eye, let's say, that hitting the bell creates a sound, so that it is the product, that sound is a product of causes and conditions. What's the condition? The bell and the clangor. What's the the action that the clangor hits the bell. So that action, that cooperative condition and the action create the sound. So that's that's an example that's derived through direct perception. There are inferential cognizers that are minds apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sound product, that comprehends sound as a product. So many words saying the same thing over and over again. So how can you establish that sound is a product through an inferential cognition? So that's example B on page 22. In the illustration of the second is an inferential cognizer comprehending that sound is a product in the continuum of such a person. So that means you don't necessarily have to see it, but you can infer that. You can have an inferential cognizer that realizes that whatever is a product of causes and conditions is necessarily impermanent. It doesn't have to be in terms of sound. And then the third, a subsequent cognizer that's an establishing condition in this syllogism. That is a sign, a mind apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sound product. An illustration of that is the second moment and so forth of an inferential cognizer, comprehending that sound is a product in the continuum of such a person. A lot of words, but if you go through it and you maybe you yourself make note, rewrite the sentence and leave out all of the intervening words, because some of the words that are in parentheses here are not in the Tibetan. They're assumed just so that it's written there so that you see all of the details, but you can just understand there are three kinds of establishing conditions that are established through direct perception, through inference, or through subsequent cognition. It could be the subsequent cognition could also mean the second moment of direct perception also. It doesn't have to be the second moment, the moment after the second moment of an inference. Bob.
I mean, when I look at this whole section, to me, what it's obviously doing is it's breaking down how you prove something. Because as you said, you need these three conditions to prove something. And one of them, the reverse pervasion, is the same as the forward pervasion.
It's not the same, but it will follow.
Yeah,
in fact, in some cases, the forward pervasion is difficult to prove, and then you prove the reverse pervasion.
Yeah, but logically
I get
they're
what you're saying.
identical. Logically they're identical. But nonetheless, so essentially what you're doing is in this thing, if you're going to make a proof, you have to prove those two conditions. And so the first half of establishing this sign is, one of the conditions, and the other half is the other condition. And then they're asking, well, how do you prove each of those conditions? Well, you have to prove each of those conditions by some other kind of valid cognizer. And they give you the three types of ways you can prove it. So it's just like a baby step leading you through how you prove an inference.
Exactly. It's baby steps. And maybe you feel, you're already walking. You don't need to crawl. So you can skip that, but it's worth seeing that. But you're right in saying that that's just some baby steps. So Amanda, maybe you got your voice back. So either you have a comment or your original question.
My original question can be later, but B, the second, an inferential cognizer, is that we infer only through logic? Is that the only way we infer?
Inferential cognizers are mental consciousnesses that have come about because of a correct sign, correct reasoning. So yes, you have it's conceptual, of course. The inferential cognizer is conceptual. So it's realized that products are necessarily impermanent. Okay.
By using logical reasoning, that's the way, like as a
Yeah,
an assistance to get there. Is that right?
yes. Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Bob.
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that in the Tibetan monasteries, they have an entire course on logical reasoning and all the conditions that you have to do to make a product exactly work so that the logical reasoning is successful and correct and so forth. And so we've compressed an entire course in a page and a half, essentially.
You could say that. Well, there's more, yeah, there's more that's covered in that course than just that. There are many, many other things. That particular subject is called Tak Rik. Like ours is low Rik, right? Rik in our low Rik is different than the Rik in Tag Rik. There it's signs and reasonings. Rik is spelled differently in Tag Rik. So that course also talks about, many other subjects besides this. And in addition, to go into more detail about this, one studies the Pramanavartaka, the text by Dharmakirti. When I was at Manjushri Institute with Geshe Tekchok, who eventually became the abbot of Sera later and subsequently passed away, Geshe Tekchok taught us the first chapter of Pramanavartaka, and there it's establishing the three modes. The whole chapter, which was a whole course, much, 3 times longer than what we'll spend here, just on that one subject. So there's a lot to be investigated, but this is a great introduction. This is like the first coat, right? When you're painting the wall, you don't expect it to be perfect. There'll be some gaps that you'll fill in as you hear the subject again and you think about it and you read other texts. Okay, so also here it says 2 on page 22, about 3/4 of the way down or 2/3 of the way down. Also, with respect to the second, minds apprehending a sign in the proof of sound is impermanent by the sound product that comprehend that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. There are 3. So this is just, I won't go over all of this. This is the same thing, like Bob said, baby steps, giving that you can establish the forward pervasion by direct perception, by inference, or by subsequent cognizers. So subsequent cognizers are not only, I think what it said here, in both cases, it gives it a second moment of inferential cognizer. It could be a second moment of a direct perceiver, also is a subsequent cognizer that establishes that. Okay, so now you got that under your belt. You have to read that again, try to, make sure that you understand all the baby steps. Now, here's another subject called valid cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves, and another division, valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another. In Geshe Repton's book, which Steve Batchelor was probably very responsible, obviously, for the translation into English, he translates it as self-ascertainable ideal minds. Is that the same thing? Valid cognizer, here he's translating as ideal mind, right? Ideal. Sometimes we say prime cognizer, valid cognizer, ideal mind. They're all translations of the word pramana, which means something which has gotten at its object and is fresh. Remember, new incontrovertible knower, ideal mind. So self-ascertainable ideal mind. So valid cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. So he's saying self-ascertainable. That's, to me, shorter words, sometimes gives it more clarity. You say it self-ascertainable and self-unascertainable. That means it has to be ascertained by some other person or some other mind. So what are we talking about here? Valid cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves, and valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another. Definitions and divisions. So we skip over the debates about this that are in the the box things. And on page 25, we say our own system is as follows. So in other words, in the Tibetan text, it says Rangluk, not what other people are saying, but what our own tradition is saying, Rangluk. So it quotes Gendun Drup. Do you know who Gendun Drup was? Anyone? Doris knows. Who's Gendun Drup?
The first Dalai Lama?
Was it first Dalai Lama or second Dalai Lama?
I'm thinking first, but you're probably.
Yarbo, what is it? You're still muted, Yarbo.
There, he's the first.
Is the first Dalai Lama. Okay.
Yeah.
So Gendun Drup. He wrote many texts. So who was the first Dalai Lama, by the way? Who was he called the first Dalai Lama at the time? Do you know this story?
No,
You don't know the story, or he wasn't called
he wasn't called the first Dalai Lama
at the time, right?
at the time.
Posthumously. So at the time of his reincarnation and then the reincarnation of him, they were all men, essentially the third Dalai Lama, that individual was a tutor to one of the Mongol kings, and they couldn't say his name, which had the word Getsul in it. Getsul means ocean, right? Like Tenzin Gyatso, the present Dalai Lama, also has Gyatso in his name. The Tibetan word Gyatso means ocean. They couldn't pronounce Gyatso in Mongolian, which I verified when I stayed in Mongolia for 4 or 5 months many years ago. If they try to pronounce the Tibetan words Gyatso, it would come out chomps. There's no relationship to Gyatso. So they used the Mongolian word for ocean or large body of water, because there are no oceans in Mongolia. They used the word Dalai. In fact, I looked on the maps in Cyrillic, in the Cyrillic alphabet, which was printed on the maps. I had to learn, the different characters in Cyrillic. There's some different, what it is. There's sort of what was used in Russia and in Mongolia. In there, there would be a big lake somewhere, and it would say something Dalai. So Dalai is the Mongolian word for ocean or large body of water. So instead of calling him this word that they couldn't pronounce, Gyatso Lama or Lama Gyatso, they called him the Dalai Lama. They didn't use the word Da, that's English, right? Dalai Lama. So he was given, the third individual in that sequence of reincarnations was given the word Dalai Lama, given the name. So the second and the first, the previous incarnation and the incarnation before that were subsequently or posthumously given the name Dalai Lama. So here we're talking, as people have informed me, Gendun Drup, the first Dalai Lama, he wrote texts, a lot of texts, and one is on called Ornament for Knowledge, the General Meaning of Dharmakirti's Commentary. So Dharmakirti's commentary is the Pramanavartika. And so it's saying Dharmakirti's commentary on Dignaga's Compendium of Valid Cognition. So Dignaga was the first of the great logicians. He wrote this Compendium of Valid Cognition, Pramana Samuchaya. And then Dignaga wrote a commentary about that called Pramanavartika. That's the more famous one. So in Gendun Drup's commentary on this, he says, definition of a valid cognizer that induces an ascertainment by itself. or self-ascertainable valid ideal mind. It is a valid cognizer, and it is able to induce ascertainment through its own power with respect to its own non-arising if the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide with the object. Whoa. Karen, you're letting your eyelids droop. Too much. Rowena, are you there? You following? I can't see Manuel or David. David's probably doing the tax returns in the background there. No, you're following. Okay. So what does this mean?
I'm just here for the imprints.
You're just here for the imprints.
Mhm.
So for instance, a valid self-ascertaining or valid cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself, or was this the other translation here? Self-ascertainable ideal mind. So what that means is that, say for instance, you see, give example of sense perception, valid sense perception. You see a green tree. I see outside my window a green tree, and that is able to induce ascertainment. What does that mean? Induce ascertainment. Ascertainment is a quality of only conceptual minds. Right? Ascertaining consciousnesses are necessarily conceptual. So it's talking about the interface between perception and conception here. The article that I mentioned to you that some of you have already by George Dreyfus is talking about this exact subject. So the interface between perception and conception, although it's not stated like that here in this text, this is what it's essentially talking about. So it's able to induce a conceptual understanding that you actually saw green, and that perception would not have been there unless there was actually green out there. Well, you might say, well, of course. But let's say, give a slightly different example. My friend Jeremy, who I often talk to on WhatsApp, you know, we talk about these Dharma subjects. It's very much like the Tibetan Geshes used to say that once you've studied all these things and you're in the La Rampa class, that's, you know, the last class before you get the highest degree of Geshe degrees, what they would do is they'd spend much of their time debating various points like this, difficult points. And there was a great understanding that was generated once you've got the basic foundations down, then going back, reading texts again, debating with your other students, deeper and deeper knowledge can come about. So Jeremy was telling me, he said, for instance, when I see a flash of color of a bird, he knows, you know, he can recognize birds, and he's not quite sure. He saw a gray bird with some red feathers or something, but he's not sure. Was that a northern woodpecker? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm giving the right name he was saying, or was it a this or that? So that would be an example of a non-self-ascertainable direct perception. He saw something, but he's not sure. He's sure he saw the colors, but he's not sure of the deep of what it actually was, the fact, whether it was this bird or another. Or say, for instance, in the distance, you see red color with your eye perception. That's self-ascertainable with respect to it being red, but is it the red color of fire or the red color of a red sheet or a red banner or a red tree? That's not self-ascertainable. Does that make sense in terms of self-ascertainable? One kind of thing you can ascertain that is that mental consciousness can be confident that you saw red, but the mental consciousness doesn't have the ascertainment that it was the red of fire or not necessarily. Maybe in some cases you can, if you're close enough to the fire, yeah, that's self-ascertainable that it was both red and that it was the red of fire. Okay, so just with that sort of preamble, let's go through the definition. The definition of a valid cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself, self-ascertainable is, it is a valid cognizer. So that would mean we're talking about the sense consciousness here, not the mental consciousness that comes about it. It's the sense consciousness. It is able to induce ascertainment through its own power. That means is able to bring about a conceptual understanding, a certainty in the mental consciousness, conceptual understanding, through its own power, through the power of the I consciousness, with respect to its own non-arising, the fact that it wouldn't have arisen if the nature of the object of comprehension did not abide within the object. Start to make some sense then, all those long words? Karen, you didn't have enough coffee this morning. Your eyelids. Rowena, you following? Okay. Ida? Okay. So let's go, so we'll go over it as we go along, we'll get it more through this. So on the other hand, the definition of a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another, or what does he call it here? Self-unascertainable. You can't ascertain it by yourself. You need something else. What is that? It's a valid cognizer, and an ascertainment must be induced through the power of another valid cognizer with respect to its own non-arising if the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide in the object. So that would be an example of like not knowing whether that particular combination of colors was this bird or that bird, or whether it was fire, the red of fire, or just red. You knew that it was red, that was self-ascertainable, but to know that it was the red of fire, you would have to use another valid cognizer, such as getting up closer and seeing that. Or what would be another way that you could ascertain that that was the color of the red that you saw was the color of fire?
You would see smoke.
Ah, so you could use another valid cognizer. Remember, it says ascertained and induced through the power of another valid cognizer. So valid cognizer that has realized that there is fire because there is smoke, right? Not just there's dust. You have to actually apprehend that it's smoke. You just see dust in the distance. You can't necessarily induce that there's fire there. But ascertainment must be induced through the power of another valid cognizer with respect to its own non-arising if the nature of the object of comprehension did not abide with the object. Starting to make sense? Bobby, Robert, there'll be two.
Yeah, could you, I mean, the thing that's hard here is actually the in part, through its own power or through the power of another, that's sort of more obvious. But when it talks about object of comprehension does not abide with the object, what does that mean?
That means that the color red that you see would not, that the comprehension of the red would not arise if it were not fire. And we're talking about fire here, okay? That you're seeing fire. At first, you don't know that it's fire, and so this has to be the ascertainment that it would not arise if it were not fire has to be induced by someone else, by something else. Another valid cognizer can actually be another valid cognizer of another person. who's a reliable witness, who says, yeah, that's fire over there. We're burning the trash.
But it sounds like, if I just take the words, I mean, the object of comprehension, for example, in your example, would be the reddish color, right? That would be what you're apprehending. And it's saying it does not abide with the object. Does that mean that you can't tell whether it's coming from a fire or not? Or
So it says, just put all the words there, with respect to its own non-arising, it wouldn't arise if, or let's say, unless the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide with the object. So the object here is red. The nature of the red is fire. So you would not have seen red unless the nature of the red, which is fire, did not abide with the object.
okay,
If there was no fire there, you wouldn't have seen red.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, all those details. Yeah, Yarpo.
So can you put this in the context of like of a Lama Rim subject like death is definite?
So I'm not sure if I could, excuse me, if I could put it in the case of death is definite. Let's see. Nothing is coming to mind. I'm sure that give me maybe next week. I'll try to come up with something about
Yeah,
death,
thank you.
whether death is definite. Okay. Maybe if someone else comes up with something now, you can add. So let's
Well,
say. Pardon?
I was just saying, just in a syllogism, you can say, I am definitely going to die because death cannot be avoided.
Right.
Like you can see,
That is
instead
that is a logical argument, a correct sign, and there are several direct signs to prove that death is definite. Say, for instance, death is definite because the first reason, the Lord of Death visits everyone, and there's no way to avoid him or her.
Right.
Maybe Lord of Death could be female, I suppose. Basically, it means death comes to everyone and there's no way to avoid it. That can be a logical reason to establish that death is definite. Another reason, the second reason, is death is definite because the time we have left to live is constantly eroding, and there is no extra time at the time of death. That can also be a logical reasoning. You might say, why have two? Well, because sometimes you haven't realized one in its entirety, and even understanding partially, adding the second reasoning makes it more gel in your mind that death is definite, right? What's the third reason that death is definite?
it can't be extended.
Pardon? No, the third reason in the 9 point.
Everyone
9 point
dies.
Go on.
Everyone dies, or things die.
No. I'm talking about the 9 point reasoning. I assume that's what Yarpo was talking about. First reason, there are three sets. Death is definite. Time of death is indefinite. There's nothing that helps at the time of death. This is the third. The first, death is definite because
Everyone dies.
the Lord of Death comes to everyone and there's no way to avoid him. Second reason for that, there is the time that we have left to live is constantly eroding or degrading or disappearing. And at the time of death, there's no extra time. You can't ask for a cigarette at the last minute like the guy who's going to be shot by the French Foreign Legion trying to prolong, say, oh no, I just need a little more time to practice Dharma. There's no extra time at the time of death. The third reason is what? Who knows? Their Lan Rim.
Okay. Didn't you just give the third reason?
No. We spend,
can't
the third
exclude?
reason is we spend most of our time not practicing the Dharma.
That's who's.
You haven't, I thought you were asking that because you were meditating on the 9-point, 9 points to establish that death is definite, or the 9 points to establish death.
That's the conclusion, isn't it, of the 3
No,
points?
that is called an experiential reasoning. It's not a logical reasoning. And that is sometimes causes people to be dubious about that. Death is definite because we spend most of our time not practicing the Dharma. That's said to be, although it's said to be one of the reasons, it is actually, it's something that brings up in your own experience that, a confidence and a urgency in understanding these other reasons. Okay, anyway, leave that aside. Okay, that was your own question about that. And if you want, you can email me about that and we can talk about it later. Definition of a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another is. It's a valid cognizer. So what kind of valid cognizers are there? There are direct valid cognizers. There are what? Inferential valid cognizers.
Subsequent.
No, that's not a valid, subsequent is not a valid cognizer.
Facsimile of a direct perceiver.
No. Valid, what are the divisions of valid cognizers? The direct valid cognizer, inferential valid cognizers, self-knowing valid cognizers,
Oh, those. Okay.
and yogic
Yoga direct.
valid cognizers, right? So any one of those would be susceptible to this thing. It is a valid cognizer, and ascertainment must be induced through the power of another. Here it says valid cognizer, but I don't think it necessarily has to be another valid cognizer. It can be another person with respect to its own non-arising if the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide with the object. So that was the example that, someone tells you, yeah, I'm burning trash there. That's fire. So you weren't sure whether the red was the red of fire or if it was just red in general, or red tree or something, and someone tells you that, or another direct valid cognizer that you get closer and you see the fire, or the inferential cognizer that knows because there's smoke, there's fire, that would be another valid cognizer. Yeah, Bob.
Again, going to the second half of this, why do you need that second half with respect? I mean, why can't you just say that ascertainment must be induced to the power of another valid cognizer? Just put a period there. What does the end of it do?
Because you do see the valid cognizer is self-ascertainable with respect to, let's say, red, but it's not self-ascertainable with respect to it that it's the red, the red of fire. So with respect to its own non-arising, it wouldn't have arisen. You wouldn't have seen red unless the nature of its object of comprehension, that is fire, did not abide with the object. If there was no fire there, you can't say that at first. You just see the red. You don't know that it wouldn't have arisen if there was no fire there because you haven't realized that it's fire. Okay, think about it. Let's go on. So on 26, we skip the paragraph that's in brackets there that has the line around it. That's the debates, divisions. In our own system, in our Rangluk, that means our Gelugpa system here, when valid cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves are divided, there are 5. Okay. Sense direct valid cognizers to which the ability to perform a function appears. Oh boy. Can your eye consciousness see the ability to perform a function? So illustration of that. The first, a sense direct valid cognizer to which the ability to perform a function appears is, for example, a sense direct perceiver that apprehends fire is able to perform the function of cooking and burning. Can fire do that? Yeah. It can perform the function of burning wood. You can see the fuel, the logs being consumed, burned, and it also performs a function of cooking, right? If you have your hot plate. So does your eye consciousness see that? Nadine, what do you think?
Yes, one can see that.
Okay, so that means eye consciousness perceives cooking. You agree?
Yes, why not?
Well, what are the objects of eye consciousness?
Shape and color.
So is cooking a shape or color?
Oh, I don't know.
Ah.
Yes.
Is the disintegration of the wood shape or color? What do you think, Stephen? You've got a comment.
Well, yeah, so I understand what you're saying about shape and color, Venerable George. Thank you for calling. But I would think, so to me, function means impermanent. So our eye can detect gross impermanence.
Our eye can what did you say? Detect?
Detect gross
Well,
impermanence.
let's be more precise. Does it apprehend eye consciousness? The objects of eye consciousness are shape and color.
Well, let me say then it apprehends change in shape and color.
Eye consciousness does
From
not
moment to
apprehend
moment.
change of shape and color. My position. Am I being sort of like,
I would respectfully
ridiculous?
disagree
You
because
would
I think my
respectfully
eye
disagree,
consciousness
right?
can detect motion.
That would be recognizing
detect
subtle
and
impermanence.
apprehend, maybe, I don't know, should we detect? So here we're talking about the interface between perception and conception. It's actually the conception that ascertain, excuse me, I have a sore tongue. I had 2 crowns taken off because there had been some cavity underneath. And they're making the new crowns. And when he did that, it left a scar on my tongue. So sometimes when I speak fast, I wince right now. It's the mental consciousness, which is conceptual, which has gotten input from the eye consciousness, which is actually ascertaining when you said motion, or the disintegration of the wood, consuming the wood that's burning, or that it is cooking. The eye consciousness itself only apprehends shape and color. So this is, after this discussion, if you go back and read the article that Bob so kindly forwarded to you guys, and if Jonathan hasn't received it yet, once you get access to it, it will be the latest one by George Dreyfus. I think it's entitled Ontology. So it's talking about this particular thing. Bob?
Yeah, I was going to say that one thing that may be helpful is that each of these consciousnesses lasts only a single moment. And so to notice change, you have to see the difference in an object through a succession of different moments.
And that is done by the mental consciousness. That is done by the conception.
Yeah, and so the sense consciousness only sees that one moment, but it's the conceptual consciousness which puts together several different moments and notices that the object is moved.
And that's where remembering consciousness comes in. And as George Dreyfus mentions in there, the resolution of these conundrums. Of course, all of this is from the Sautrantika point of view, right? Hinayana school. Could be applicable to Chittamatra also, maybe Yogacara, Svatantrika also. But in general, in the Prasangika, they have other ways to avoid these conundrums. But in general here, so the Choate School, the eye consciousness only sees shape and color, but the mental consciousness that ensues, is that right? It comes after that, is what puts it together. And it is, in certain cases, it's a remembering consciousness of what the eye consciousness saw and is ruminating about that, thinking about that, conceiving about that. So here, let's go, the divisions. In our own system, when valid cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves are divided, there are 5. Sense direct valid cognizers to which the ability to perform a function appears. I'm not sure about ear, nose, taste, and tactile consciousnesses, how the ability to perform a function would appear to them. General example that I'm thinking of is eye consciousness. When we talk about seeing, cooking, and as is said here, a sense direct perceiver that apprehends fire is able to perform the function of cooking and burning. You think about whether ear consciousness, nose, tongue, and tactile consciousness can apprehend its object is able to perform a function. Interesting. The other division, sense direct valid cognizers that have a familiar object. Okay, so say for instance, who haven't I called on here? Manuel. When Manuel was a little baby, I assume he was a little baby once, when he saw his mommy or daddy, who he had seen, held in the arms, as soon as he saw that familiar object, he perceived that was, maybe not use the word mommy or daddy, maybe at what he spoke the first time, he said dada or mama or something, everyone's excited, but there was a, the eyes got big, a smile on the face. So that is what is kind of an example here, a direct valid cognizer that has a familiar object. And the text says the second, a sense direct valid cognizer having a familiar object is, for example, a sense direct perceiver in the continuum of a son apprehending his father's form. It doesn't have to be only the infant. You can have, say, for instance, if your friend or your partner or whatever, or let's say Trump or something, you just see that hair. You don't even have to see, the voice, hear the voice or anything else. Or a familiar object. You have a this is a sense direct valid cognizer that has a familiar object. So does the eye consciousness recognize Father, Bob?
Well, to me, this whole thing doesn't make sense because if
I know all of this doesn't make sense to you. You have a lot of good doubts. That'll make you
to have a familiar object. To me, requires memory. I mean, the only way you can
there's
know
memory. There's memory in eye consciousness, right?
Well, I don't think so.
Yeah. There is.
I think memory is a conceptual thing where you.
Well, there are two kinds of memory. There is the word smriti in Sanskrit. What is it in Pali? They say sati, right? Satipatthana Sutra, right? Close placement of mindfulness. In Tibetan, Dempa. Dempa means both a factor of all our sense consciousnesses, which is able to remain on the object. It doesn't necessarily mean conceptualizing. In the case of conception, Dempa also can think about it. Okay, but that mindfulness or memory abides in both perception and conception. So the question is, does the eye consciousness recognize Father? Christine says, yeah. But what are the objects of eye consciousness, Christine?
Form and color.
Shape and color.
I mean,
yeah.
shape and color. Yeah.
Yeah, you can say form, you understand, shape and color. Usually the form is a little bit different, but you say shape and color. So how can it recognize father? How can it apprehend father?
Well, father has a memorable shape and color.
Yeah,
Like
but
you
that's
said,
not the
right there.
function. Memorable here doesn't mean, so the function of memory in eye consciousness isn't one that remembers father. It just keeps the same object in place. So again, it's the mental consciousness, which is conceptual, which recognizes the father.
Oh, okay.
So again, I'm trying to encourage you to read that article because I'm hoping that it will inspire you, because you'll get through some of it and you'll say, yeah, I get this. I never would have understood this a month ago. Okay, so
So I have a question.
Yes.
So what is the memory of the sense consciousnesses called?
Say again.
You said that the sense consciousness has a memory. It can remember.
Well, it has this mental factor that can be variously translated as mindfulness or memory. The way we use the word memory usually refers to the conceptual aspect of it. Mindfulness means, like say for instance, just keeping something, let's say the sense consciousness that's able to say one of the omnipresent mental factors is attention, paying attention to one thing, so you can keep it in mind. Mindfulness in that regard would mean the ability of the eye, let's say in the eye consciousness, to keep the continuity of that attention over time. That doesn't mean that it thinks it remembers father. That's conceptual. Okay.
Is that ability to be mindful a precursor to the mental being able to perceive that it's father? Is that
it's an extension of that within conception that can excuse me, that can call to mind something that happened, oh, that's my high school friend, can remember something that happened years ago or something like that. It's an extension of that mindfulness.
The conception is
that we call memory.
Okay.
So they're the same mental factor, having different qualities in different contexts.
Okay.
Let me go on further. So direct valid cognizers to which the ability to perform a function appears. So these are able to induce ascertainment by themselves. Sense direct valid cognizers that have a familiar object like the father or Trump or whatever. Self-knowing direct valid cognizers. So what is this? Self-knowing, remember, so self-knowing, let's say in the eye consciousness, it's that which bears the aspect of an apprehender. It's the quality of that eye consciousness that is only aiming inward and is recognizing eye consciousness. It's not apprehending the object of the eye consciousness, say green or red or something like that. Just apprehending eye consciousness. This is a valid cognizer that induces ascertainment by themselves. So you may, I think Bob and some others have said something, oh, self-knowing, this doesn't make sense, so forth and so on. But this is something that Dharmakirti and Dignaga Dharmakirti spearheaded. I think it also, you find reference to self-knowing in the sutras, but it's part of the Sautrantika system that was extended to the Chittamatra and the Yogacara Svatantrikas Prasangika has a different idea. They say there is no self-knowing. But anyway, self-knowing direct valid cognizers are said to be self-ascertainable. Yogic direct valid cognizers are said to be self-ascertainable, or cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. They're never wrong. They know that. And inferential valid cognizers are also self-ascertainable. So we're getting to the end, so I will just ask you to read the illustrations of that. And I'll just go to the next page, 27. When valid cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another. So this is the one where you can't ascertain that the nature of the object is there, although you do have a valid cognizer of something, but you don't know what it's a valid cognizer of. Like say you see someone, example, when I was at dinner in, I think I told this story before. When I was dinner in Sonoma with some friends that lived up there many years ago, we went out to a restaurant at night in the summer, and it was outdoor, sort of like a corral almost, tables. And I was sitting with my friends at one table, and someone walked in, man and a young woman, and my friends all went, and he was walking by. I didn't know who this was. He was walking by, and actually he looked at me and smiled and did something and walked by, and my friends are all like tense. And I said, "What's going on? What's going on? Did you see he was looking at me? Is that why you're surprised?" They said, "No, that's Robert Redford." Was with some young, I don't know, who knows what was going on. I don't think it was his daughter. Anyway, so they sat down, and so there was a valid cognition. I saw a person, I saw a man, but it was not self-ascertainable. I didn't know that the nature of the object, it didn't ascertain at that time that I wouldn't have apprehended that man if the nature of Robert Redford wasn't there. That had to be told by another, right? My friend said, "That's Robert Redford." You get it? Did that ever happen to you? You saw some famous person and you didn't know who it was, and someone else told you who it was. Okay. Example, a sense direct receiver in the continuum of a person who has not previously experienced seeing an utpala. You know what an utpala is? Stephen, what's an utpala?
It's a blue-colored flower.
It's related to the lotus family, but it's usually they say a blue lotus, but it's like you say, it's maybe slightly genetically different. It's like Tara, Arya Tara is holding an utpala in her, in the stem of an utpala flower in her hand, right? I once asked Lama Yeshe, when he was teaching me about white Tara, I said, "Why is white Tara why is it a upala?" And Lama said, "Maybe she likes blue." I don't know. So anyway, so a sense direct receiver in the continuum of a person who has not previously experienced seeing an upala that apprehends the color of an upala. So you see the flower, or say a rose. The first time you're not familiar with rose, and you see this flower, you see it's red, you know it's a flower, so it's a valid cognition with respect to being a red flower, but it is not self-ascertainable with respect to it being a rose. You have to be told that it is a rose, or you have to read that it's a rose. You read it, your guidebook. Oh, that's a rose. You go to the what is it called? The big gardens. What are they called? And Singapore and so forth, all the different flowers, you don't know what they are. You see a flower, the particular color and shape, and then you have to read the description of what it is. So that's not self-ascertainable. And the second, an inattentive direct perceiver. Because when we said here, valid cognition, cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, terminologically. So are inattentive perceivers valid cognizers? No, Bob says no. Jonathan, I'm not sure as Jonathan's nodding that it is. What do you think, Rowena, are inattentive perceptions valid cognizers?
No.
Okay, good. You were good. You were. And Karen, you have an opinion? Okay. Ida, you know what inattentive perceptions are, right? So say, for instance, you see something, but you're listening more intently to what is being said, and so what has appeared to your consciousness is not doesn't induce a remembering consciousness. So it's called an inattentive perception. So this is only a terminological, or what was the other word we used? So it's not a real division. It's not an actual valid cognizer, but it seems like. The second, an inattentive perception is, for example, a sense direct perceiver that apprehends sound in the continuum of a person whose mind is especially attracted to a beautiful form. The example we gave so many times before, you're watching the ballet, or meat and potatoes guys watching the football game, you're completely entranced, or the ballet, and someone says something to you, you kind of remember that something was said, but you can't induce ascertainment of what it was. That's not actually a valid cognizer. Okay, it's just a terminological, because it seems like a valid cognizer. And then third, a direct perceiver having a cause of error. What is this? For example, a sense direct perceiver apprehending the color of a mirage that directly generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. So say, for instance, you see in the distance, you're in the desert, you see what looks like water in the distance, and you run toward it, or on the highway. Maybe all of you have experienced this when the right conditions occur, when the light refracts due to the heat of the road. It looks like there's water on the road ahead, and you put on the brakes, and you realize when you get there, there's no water there at all. That was just a reflection, that was a mirage, right? So here we're talking about when someone sees a mirage, or the color of the mirage, that generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. What is this supposed to be? An example of a direct perceiver having a cause of error. Is that a valid cognizer?
No.
No, it's not a valid cognizer. Well, it's valid with respect to the color, but it's not valid with respect to it being water, the color of water. Stephen, what are you thinking?
What I'm thinking, Venerable George, is that if we use the word superimposition, it is no longer a direct perceiver. We're now in the conceptual realm.
Yeah, so here, because we're talking about which is induced by another. So in all of these cases, although it's not obvious in all of them, the ascertainment is done by the conception. In this case, it's more clear. Yeah, when it's superimposition. So superimposition, you know what superimposition means? Superimposition means when, well, let's say you superimpose on the picture, you put some other lights up on there. You put a mustache on Hillary Clinton or something like that. That's a superimposition. It's not really there. It's something that you superimpose on the image. So our minds do the same thing. We superimpose qualities that are not actually there. Like say, for instance, we superimpose permanence in our mind on things that are impermanent. We superimpose pleasure on feelings which are actually the nature of suffering. Remember when we talk about suffering, all contaminated feelings, even of pleasure, are actually the nature of suffering, right? Do you know, remember that? Nadine, do you know that? Happy feelings are actually suffering. Doesn't that cause discordance in anyone's mind? Well, because they're just replacing one suffering with another, right? We say they're the nature of suffering. So that's another superimposition, superimposing purity on that which is impure, like viewing the aggregates which are actually impure, superimposing purity there just because of your own misconceptions. Oh, that's beautiful. That's what pure. Bob.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the funny thing about this is that it's, well, terminologically, so it's not, but ascertainment is induced by another. So I guess what it's saying is that normally, if we had some sort of valid cognition, our ascertainment is coming from the nature of the object that we're ascertaining. But in this case, it's a false imagination. So
well,
that's
not all the time, because say, for instance, you can have a valid cognizer seeing red, but the fact that it is the red of fire is still a valid cognizer with respect to red, but is not a valid cognizer with respect to being the red of fire. That has to be induced by another. Okay, so I will give you that, to read over those examples. And I will continue next time when valid cognizers on page 27, near the end of the page where it says when valid cognizers, when in ascertainment is induced by another, are terminologically divided in another way. There are three. Valid cognizers that are induced by another, ascertainment induced by another, by itself, but the truth by another. Valid cognizers when ascertainment of the generality is induced by itself, but the particular by another. And valid cognizers when ascertainment of even the mere appearance is induced by another. Say, for instance, the second one, you see a tree, and you know it's a tree, but you don't know, you know the generality tree, the general characteristic of tree, but you don't know whether it's an oak or a shimsha or a bodhi or whatever. The valid cognizer when ascertainment of the generality is induced by itself, the generality being tree, but the particular is induced by another. Amanda.
I was wondering if I could ask my original question now.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, do you need to have a high IQ in order to understand Buddhism?
I don't think so. I think many of the great yogis, I think if Milarepa was given an IQ test, he would have had an IQ of 30 or something like that, because it's measuring something else. His wisdom was immense. IQ, when we talk about intelligence quotients, it has to do with very particular kind of things that society has deemed importance in intelligence. Whereas if you gave the IQ test that asks you to, how many, if the train is 5 minutes late and you're 2 minutes early or something like, all these kinds of mathematical questions, he wouldn't have been able to give you an answer necessarily.
So
So if
Um,
you have genius IQ, you may not actually be able to. I know some people with very high IQs who wouldn't do well in Buddhism. I think it has to do with emotional intelligence, and also the ability to persevere and to logically understand things that isn't always measured in IQ.
and
Anyway.
karma.
Karma require the understanding of karma. What are you saying?
No, it's karma required in order
Is
to
karma
understand
required
Buddhism.
for what?
To understand Buddhism. As a result of karma, one understands Buddhism.
So generally, when we talk about wisdom or intelligence, we talk about two types: innate and that which is generated this lifetime. So same thing when we talk about, in another context in education, when we talk about, in genetics, what do we talk about? Nurture or nature? What is that argument about? Nurture or nature? Nurture meaning qualities that are nurtured this lifetime, or whether you have the predisposition by nature to have those qualities, right? You know this question, nurture or nature. So this is similar in when we talk about intelligence. There are both. We have certain predisposition for sharp mind and intelligence, and say in belief and so forth, due to our past karmic experiences, the imprints that we have left in our mind. So we have a certain kind of intelligence that's innate, that is due to karma. So that's why it's important now, even though you don't understand everything, to put effort in understanding these things. So in the future, all of this will click. The next lifetime you hear low rig and say, oh yeah, that's obvious. And there is a kind of wisdom and intelligence and understanding that's developed by nurture, or let's say that is cultivated this lifetime through effort. So if you have a supply of innate wisdom and understanding of Buddhism, experience of Buddhism from past lives, and you have the capacity to increase that this lifetime, that's the best of all possible worlds. Like in our concluding prayers, when we say, may the bodhicitta which has not been developed, develop, and may what, that would be what's happening this lifetime, and may that which has been developed increase more and more. That's the innate bodhicitta that you already have. May that increase more and more.
Thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of material. I've gone the full 2 hours. My apologies to all of you, and to Bob, and to Shanka. I think it was Shanka who was lobbying me to go an hour and a half before, but I think maybe worthwhile today. Let's do the dedication prayers that the center has as a final element here. Here it says due to the merits. Actually, it says due to these virtues. Gewadi. Due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings, all migrators, without exception, into that very enlightened state. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. That's this lifetime. May that which has arisen, or their imprints of, not diminish, but increase more and more. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Wish-granting jewel, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in the world, incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. O Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those migrators, wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Finally, Yeshe Sherab, who's back with us, beloved teacher, leading students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, the stages of the path. You, unequaled guide, please live long and stable life. So thank you for your attention. I think Karen is finally, her eyelids are rising a little bit. She maybe had a cup of cappuccino. Thanks all of you. Hope to see you next week, and be safe and healthy.
Thank you, Venerable.